everyone, it's Joe Waxman, and I'm here with Steven Acuff. And Steven has been a macrobiotic teacher and educator for a long time. He's been involved in macrobiotics for many decades, and he's written a very popular book and been active within the macrobiotic community for a long time. And I'm going to let Steven talk about all that stuff. Steven, how are you doing?
Well, hi, Joe. Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to your program.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to have you here. And as always, Steven, how did you begin your journey in macrobiotics?
Yeah, I was lucky to be blessed with a lively curiosity. So at the age of 25, I just went to a lecture about macrobiotics, and they offered food also. And that's all I needed. I tasted one meal. The theory sounded like it made sense, but eating the food really sold me. So I thought about it a couple of days and decided, well, I'll try this for a week and just see how I feel. But even after 24 hours, I felt so much different. You know, I didn't have any health problems. Basically, it was just interest. But I slept less. I felt stronger. And so out of 1 week experiment, here I am now, all these decades later. And really looking back on that as one of the best strokes of luck in my life. At the time, I had actually just returned from Vietnam. I was in the U.S. military, Second Field Forces, and I did feel a bit of that kind of post-war kind of heaviness. You know, it was a very controversial war. You know, we didn't come back as heroes. You know, how many babies did you kill? That kind of thing, and so there was a bit of heaviness, and what I really noticed with my macrobiotic change was how my mental function changed, how I felt an immediate lightening, and how I suddenly was really enjoying myself again. So boy, I was sold. And then at that time, you couldn't really get much information on it, so I spent years, you know, step by step figuring it out. I'm from the West Coast, from Oregon, so I was around Herman Ihara and Cornelia Ihara more than Michio Kushi.
What time period
And
was that, Steven?
that was 1971, and January 1971. So it'll soon be 50 years ago that I had that amazing encounter. And yeah, so I just, you know, when I do health counseling today, food coaching, I often tell the people how lucky they are that today they can talk to people who have all these years of experience who can help them, because in those days, in the 70s, we were just, you know, plodding along, learning one thing at a time, and it really took a lot of experience to be able to really find out how the food should be for optimal health. Now, I was very lucky because I worked together with Michio Kushi later on. I moved to Europe, and I worked with Michio when he did his big summer international camps in Switzerland. Actually, we were a whole group of people doing it. And they needed a German translator for his consultations, so I was able to be his German translator. And then I learned a lot from Michio just translating for him. And then when I got a chance, I met a man who came to one of my lectures who owned a clinic in Germany. He was planning on putting up a new program where he would include natural therapies, so like Kneipp, a famous German natural therapy. And he thought that macrobiotic food sounded like the right thing for this. So we started out on that. In 1987, I went to Boston, and then I studied with Michio for a month really intensely to be able to handle this cancer thing. And he was very gracious to me, let me stay in his home. And so I really was lucky to be able to get that kind of training very, very early on. And then I really needed it too, because I began working at a clinic in Kassel, which is right in the middle of Germany. And the medical doctors there, the oncologists, the cancer specialists, they were very skeptical of what I did. And so I really had to be on my toes to, you know, do the best job I could, because they were always looking for a reason to throw me out. Basically, you know, they want to do their chemotherapy, and people would ask me what I thought about chemotherapy. So I would always have to be a master diplomat to be able to get my message across without enraging the doctors. So that was kind of the way I went along. I started a macrobiotic center in Sweden with my now ex-wife, and we have 4 children, and now I got 9 grandchildren. They're all, enjoying the good food and that they learned at home. So I've really been happy that everything's gone the way it has, because rebellion among children is, I think, probably a common thing that happens. They want to do it differently than their parents, but my children have felt so good with the food that they pass it on to their children. And I still do a lot of travels. I've spoken in 27 countries. Someone asked me how many countries it was. I actually counted them up, and I included Scotland as a separate country, so I get up to 27. And I've been around, Israel, had a very interesting trip to Israel, and South America, Asia, Australia. George Osawa promised us a very rich and interesting life, with macrobiotics, and it certainly has delivered for me. I just, see how, first of all, for me personally, I haven't seen a doctor since I became macrobiotic. I know just before I went to see the doctor, I've been eating this military food for a couple of years, and I had a lump on my right arm where the large intestine meridian is on the middle of the lower arm. And as a young man, I thought maybe I've got a tumor. So I go to the doctor. That was actually my last trip to the doctor. And he said, well, this is just a lipoma. It's a very harmless thing, but I can cut it out. There's no problem. So I told him, well, if it's harmless, I'll just keep it because I don't like being cut. And then it happened that I just went to this macrobiotic lecture and started changing my food, eating brown rice and miso soup. And within 6 weeks, the thing was gone on my arm. So I knew I'd really found something amazing there, that, they're going to do this minor operation on my arm, and it just disappeared. So I got very, very much interested in that. I watched my toenails grow. My toenails grew out. They were twice as thick as they had been before, like really solid toenails. And I remember when I cut my big toenail after 6 months, I found out how long it took for big toenails to grow. And I now had an even toenail with this new thickness. And so I was out telling the world about it. And I discovered that most people would rather debate it with me than just take a couple of days and try it out. And so I went off to Europe and did different things there. And then I ended up staying there with my wife. We met because of macrobiotic activities, actually. And then I did a lot of traveling, and Thailand. I've been to Thailand many times, and a great group of macrobiotic people there. A man who actually cured his colon cancer with macrobiotics. He and his wife invited me to come. So it's like a world community of people that just have this common interest in food, and of course there's a whole lifestyle that goes with it. But when I look at what I've done in my life now, looking back on it now at the age of 74, it's just amazing to think of a life without medical treatment. The medical treatment has now become the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy. And when I travel around the world, people will say, well, what's life like in Sweden? And I will tell them, well, it's nice, but they have the highest taxes in the world. Like I teach macrobiotics at a natural healing institute here in Stockholm. And of the money I get 22.5%, and the rest goes to the state. Different. It's there's a sales tax, VAT it's called in the UK. There's income tax, there's this and that kind of tax. So I get only a little piece of the pie. And so I will say, well, there's really high taxes, I think too high. And they'll say, yes, but you get all that free medical care, I say, well, I and my children have never seen the inside of a hospital or a doctor's place, so we've just been paying for the problems other people have.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a very great thing to have, to be able to say that I've just been paying my taxes, but I haven't needed the medical services. And now at my age, I'm only 4 years away from the average life expectancy of a man in Western Europe.
Wow.
And, for many people, it'd be, well, I'm kind of going towards the end now, but in reality, I still lecture. I still do counseling, which has now become pretty much Zoom counseling rather than in person. And I have no signs of slowing down. A bit like, like Denny Waxman and Bill Tara, these people, they're all just living proof that this is a great way to spend your life, because, they're all doing well. I saw Denny and Bill Tara a couple years ago in Berlin when we had the International Macrobiotic meeting. And this group of people who have spent their lives dedicated to helping others with this. And with macrobiotics, it's a bit like becoming a Chinese medical expert. With the years, you just gather more and more information. Rather than saying, well, now I've done my part, now I'm just going to sit back in my rocking chair or play golf. It's just fun to get out there and do it. And my own personal interest is in knowing more about supplements and adding that onto the food, because I'm convinced that the macrobiotic food program is the best way you can go for food. But dealing with these heavy problems like cancer, and especially at my time in the clinic, I realized that some people were so nutritionally depleted, that they just didn't have time for this long-term balancing of zinc and magnesium and other minerals. They really needed to do something about that. So at the clinic, we had a German special blood test that was actually started in Germany, and now there's actually a lab in Chicago that offers it too, called Doctor's Data. And it's called the spectrometric whole blood test, which looks at blood in a much deeper way than a normal serum test that you would get from a doctor. And 95 or even maybe 97% of the patients had very serious mineral deficiencies.
Wow.
And minerals are a major part of the body. We're basically water and minerals. And we began working with those patients with supplements, which I ordered from the US, because pharmaceutical supplements are basically drugs that, they've been produced the same way they produce aspirin and everything else. So there's a company in the US called Megafood. Many people may know it. Megafood has everything organically bound. It's got an organic source. They use a lot of food sources for their supplements, and the body absorbs that 100%. So I started importing those into Germany for the patients, and also myself. Sometimes I would take some, and I did a hair analysis at that time, and I had perfect mineral balance, but my chromium was a bit low. And when I researched it, I found that almost half the population over 40 years old has a chromium deficiency, because it's just a trace element. So you don't have any real chrome sources like you would have of, say, magnesium that's in seaweed. So I did for a while take some chromium, just because I discovered that. But I did find that when patients took these organically bound supplements, that it did improve their outlook with dealing with cancer. Also, many of them have gone through chemotherapy, so their body's been totally ravaged by that. And the body needs a lot of zinc and magnesium and vitamin C to take care of the oxidative stress that's caused by chemotherapy. So even now, I still enjoy finding out more about these things. And when we think about our present drama crisis of COVID, this has become particularly interesting, because through my research into natural healing and natural medicine, I have discovered that quercetin, which is a flavonoid, it's found in berries, etc., but you can buy it as a concentrate, actually has the same effect as the hydroxychloroquine, which is such a controversial thing right now about, Trump recommended it. And because of the highly charged political atmosphere in the US at the moment, it's like, if Trump recommended it, then it can't be good. But in German, they have an expression that even a blind chicken will find a kernel of grain here and there pecking around. So we could say that he definitely got that right. I've seen cases where it happens. I know doctors who are working with it, And of course, they're working with the hydroxychloroquine, which is a product, a medication, and you can get the same results with quercetin because all that does is open the cells. It's a cell opener. And then if you take zinc with that, the zinc actually will stop virus replication. So, anyone who's concerned about COVID could just, have those in reserve in case they start getting sick. Just take them. I wouldn't take them all the time, as a precaution. But taking a combination of zinc and hydroxychloroquine has been used to save a lot of people's lives. Dr. Vladimir Zelenko in New York is very successful with that. And things like vitamin D, vitamin D3. I follow what's going on with medical research, and just about a month ago, a study was published where they looked at people who had died from COVID, and they compared two groups. One group had a low vitamin D level, and they looked at another group that had high normal, like they were in the high range of normal. And they found that your risk of dying from COVID are 19 times greater if you're in the low vitamin D level. So here in Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, people have always taken cod liver oil as a vitamin D because we don't have the sun all year like you get further south. So vitamin D deficiency is pretty much pre-programmed if you don't get enough sun on the skin. So you take vitamin D3 as a supplement, and you can bridge over that. So, it would be worth anyone who's concerned about that to either take vitamin D3 as cod liver oil, or take as a supplement if you don't like cod liver oil, and just as a precaution, or go to a doctor and get a blood test and find out exactly where your D level is to find out if you need it. Of course, it changes. Like now in the summer, you'll need it less than you would in the winter. Right. But I really appreciated the macrobiotic background I have in April, because I was in Australia and I wanted to come back to Sweden. And at the time, they were recommending that everybody over 70 years old should stay at home, like even find somebody to go to the supermarket and buy your food. And so here I am, over 70 years old. And so I went out to the airport, Melbourne airport, and stood in line. I turned in my luggage, and I went to security check and the passport check, and I go to the gate and sit around with all these people. Then I get on an airplane where every seat was taken because it was the last flight out of Australia to get to Sweden. Last flight, guaranteed flight. So here we were, packed, and here I am thinking, well, now, we're right at this peak of COVID right now. What if somebody sitting around me is infected? And it didn't bother me at all, because I was absolutely sure that I would not be infected for two reasons. First, I have a good macrobiotic basis. I eat seaweed, so I get plenty of magnesium. I'm getting selenium. Those are the two most important minerals. I took vitamin D a bit beyond the cod liver oil, although I was coming out of the Australian summer, so I had pretty good D just from the sun, but I took a little bit extra to be sure. And then I took colloidal silver on my hands whenever I would go to the little restroom they have there, which is, instantly kills microbes. And I really had absolutely zero fear. And I realized this is the crowning of the benefit I've had from all these years of being so health conscious and really promoting a healthful lifestyle, because there's so much fear around people. They think, it's like the COVID drops out of the sky on your head. It could happen to anyone at any time. And yet we know that your physical condition will make a difference. We know in the U.S., with so much obesity and diabetes, the U.S. is leading in that those are conditions that will increase the likelihood of dying. Also, high blood pressure. And so my attitude was that even if I get infected, I'm not going to feel anything, or maybe I would have some slight cold symptoms, but I'm certainly not going to be on a respirator in the emergency room. I know that. And so here I am after 4 months, still going strong and learning more and more about this all the time.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard some things about the vitamin D supplements. Like, I'm not real clear on the details, but that generally the straight D supplements were to be avoided. That they're really not that great for you unless you have maybe a severe deficiency. But so my question is, if someone were to take cod liver oil, what do you recommend as far as cod liver oil? Because I heard a lot of it is just rancid.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a good question because the rancidity of an oil that is polyunsaturated, which cod liver oil is always, there because polyunsaturates go rancid very quickly. So there are two basic preservatives that are used. One is vitamin E, and the other is what's that? That's that natural thing, rosemary. Rosemary it is. So I've had cod liver oils where they actually use rosemary, which I prefer. But the general run of the thing is vitamin E. So when you take cod liver oil, you get, well, I'll start over a little bit here. The original cod liver oil has actually quite a bit of vitamin D, but because they clean it, they put it through something called molecular distillation. And I get this question a lot from people. They think that cod liver oil must be very contaminated because it comes from the liver of a fish. And the liver, of course, is the detox organ. And most of the good cod liver oil comes from Norway. They also have it in China, but I wouldn't touch that stuff. But the Norwegian stuff is good, and they have very strict rules about how it's produced. In the U.S., they have, we could call it the luxury top class of cod liver oil is called green pasture.
The fermented stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Fermented.
Yeah, I've had that.
Yeah, blue ice. Now that's a great, but it comes originally from Norway. So when you take that, they have some kind of preservative in it, so it doesn't go rancid. And the reason that cod liver oil has such a bad reputation is that people in my age who got cod liver oil as children, some of us, we were getting something that was rancid. In those days, they did not understand even that it had to be kept cold. They would have it in the cupboard somewhere. And children were actually being given rancid oil, which is understandable why they thought it was horrible. In the US, they have Carlson's, which has a lemon flavor, if you like. They've got both the natural fish as well as lemon. And it's a good oil. I've checked into the background of it. So you get the vitamin D is okay, but because of the molecular distillation, some of the D is lost in that. So that's why they will enrich that with vitamin D that comes out of sheep wool. Oh. So that's where the enrichment comes from, because you do have a weaker vitamin D if you just have the D that's in the fish oil. Now, some people could eat fish liver, or liver in general, like cow liver, or, sheep liver, but I wouldn't go near that. I prefer the cod liver oil. And having lived in Scandinavia for so many years, it's such a normal thing. Like in Norway, if you go into a supermarket, you'll find at least 3 different kinds of cod liver oil there, just around it, by like olive oil. And so it is worth looking at. Now, vitamin D is especially important. In fact, just a couple months ago, I made some interesting discoveries about Professor Coimbra in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, who is now working with vitamin D and has had 1,500 confirmed cases of people recovering from multiple sclerosis with his vitamin D therapy. Because they found that vitamin D actually in higher doses, which I would never take myself, but he's a medical doctor and this is his specialty, that you can actually regenerate nerve tissue, which has been damaged by the autoimmune reaction on the nerves in the body. So I thought that was amazing that he's using 100,000 to 150,000 IUs, international units of vitamin D every day. To me, 5,000 units is like a top amount I would take if I was in the middle of the winter, say in the northern part of the U.S. or here in Scandinavia. That would, to me, be a top dose. And here he's working with, just astronomical amounts there. But, I actually met a woman in Germany who cured her MS through him, and she just found him on the internet. She thought there must be a solution. So if you do take too much vitamin D, it can create a calcification of the body. So it's certainly something you'd want to be careful of. If you live in Florida, Arizona, those places that have a lot of sun, you really don't need any supplementation. If you get out in there, that climate is just right for that. And in fact, that's why I like being in Australia in the northern winter, is because I'm able to tank up the vitamin D there during the winter. So I've been having two summers a year for some years now, and making me probably well supplied with D. I haven't had any blood tests, but just the way I feel, and I never get a cold. My immune system is working fine. Yeah, so this COVID thing is really showing us how important it is to have balance. And but this holistic thinking of macrobiotics is the key, because if you get too much lost in these things, let's take vitamin D. Well, people will forget that when you eat sugar, your white blood cells become much weaker, and even down to about 20% of their normal firepower. So, if you do vitamin D, but you just eat sugar, you're still going to be vulnerable. But when you've got the right view of what you eat and what you don't eat, so we don't eat sugar, obviously, then the white blood cells will be working at full power. And then you be sure you have these other things that are important, like the selenium, which as a macrobiotic person, you have automatically if you eat seaweed. I've never taken a selenium supplement. In fact, when I worked at the German clinic, I had a constant point of irritation, because selenium is known to reduce cancer, and most cancer patients have a selenium deficiency. So the German doctors who were interested in natural things, but they weren't just natural. So every cancer patient who came into the clinic got selenium supplements. And then when they came to me for their personal counseling session, I would tell them, well, you're going to be eating seaweed with us here, so you really don't need those selenium supplements. And even if you do both, you eat seaweed and take selenium, you can actually get a selenium toxicity, which actually is toxic. And so when they would go back and tell their doctors this, then the doctors would come into my office, with, storming into my office angry, telling me that I was just there to talk about food. I was not supposed to tell people about, which supplements they should take and not take. But, I felt obliged to do that for the simple reason that they could get a selenium toxicity. And while we're talking about that, selenium as a supplement, unless it's mega foods selenium, it's going to be a synthetic chelation generally, or maybe something else even worse. But these are not, they don't have the same absorption that you have when you eat the selenium in a seaweed. There you've got all of the way humans have taken food throughout history. And I find it very, very interesting when I talk to people that a lot of people get very much into the supplement issue. And I tell them, well, that's fine. The supplements have their place, but they are a supplement. You supplement food with that. And you have to have the right kind of food as your basis. And then you can take these other things. And I see it works, because I meet people along the way, and they're taking supplements. They're doing hair analysis and these things, but they don't have the basis. And well, I'll give you an example. Recently, I was teaching at this institute here in Stockholm, and I'm telling them about the benefits of eating whole grains. And then some young woman in her mid-20s sitting in the front row says, I don't think you should eat that much carbohydrate. Grains are a lot of carbohydrate. Now, low carb is now in, and so before I got into a discussion of the carbs, I just said, well, here I am in my mid 70s, and I haven't seen a doctor since I was your age, so it seems to be working, and then that was the end of the discussion. I didn't even have to go into the fact that, well, if we're going to eat low carb, it means low fiber, because fat and protein don't have fiber. So low carb means we're going to be eating fiberless food. That doesn't sound too smart. So, it's having this personal experience really helps to get the word across.
Steve, I just want to ask you another question. A lot of people, it's a very popular kind of ideology that more is better, especially when talking about nutrition. Like, we need to make sure we have, ample amounts of all the nutrition. But do you think, in my opinion, in my mind, having excess nutrition isn't always better. Like, it's not always better to have more of everything, And it's a tricky call, because you don't want to be deficient, but you also don't want to have too much of it. Too much nutrition can also cause harm. So what's your take on that?
Well, that's exactly right what you said. There's something called the bell curve, which you might have heard about. The bell curve shows that there's a line going up showing you the benefit you have from the nutrition, and then the line going along the side is the amount. So as the amount increases going this way, you see it's called a bell because it goes, so I can do this in reverse here for the camera. You see a climbing of the benefits. So it's going up, like, looks like a bell going up, and then you reach the midsection, which is we would call the normal range, and that's the top of the bell. And then if you keep taking more and more, then the bell starts dropping on the other side. So you're going down, and at some point you will end up at the same place you were when you had too little. So that's right. So the bell curve shows us that you really need to be in the proper range. And a good example is calcium. People are fixated on calcium. When I wrote this book, Eating the Wu Wei for a Longer, Healthier Life, I included 2 chapters on calcium because it is such a point of confusion. One chapter is called The Milk Myth, and one chapter is called Calcium Confusion. And people are so fixated on getting calcium and getting as much as they can. And what they do is they suppress magnesium by doing that. And when you look at these whole blood tests, these spectrometric whole blood tests that I saw a lot in Germany, you see that people much more often have a magnesium deficiency than a calcium deficiency. And the more they pump up that calcium, not only are they taking a lot of dairy food, which has got much more calcium than the human body needs. That's why it's for the calf and not for the person. But also they're taking calcium supplements, just to be sure. And I get this question a lot in counseling. And so you see that the result is that you have suppressed magnesium from the overload of calcium. So you have 2 problems. One is now you've got a calcification, and the other hand, you've got too little magnesium. So you certainly can get too much. And that's what makes food such an exciting thing for your basis, because you can't eat too much calcium if you eat just vegetable, like leafy green vegetables. Seaweed have calcium, but you're not going to get too much there. Right. In fact, there's an interesting book by Dr. Thomas Levy, Levy, an amazing man. He's a cardiologist in the U.S., and just for fun, he went back to the university and studied law and became a lawyer. So he's probably the only cardiologist and lawyer in the country. But he's written a book called Death by Calcium, and points out that calcium is one of the most toxic substances people can take, and it's what people want to get the most of. And Dr. Robert Thompson, also from Anchorage, Alaska, also very bright medical doctor, has written a book called The Calcium Lie, which I mentioned in my book. And both of them point out that magnesium is what you need, and magnesium is the antagonist of calcium. So when we look at the problems that come from excess calcium, one of the most common ones is prostate cancer. When they look at why, at my age, half of all men have prostate cancer at my age. It's amazing how common that is. Even though it's not that common a cause of death, and they have a heart attack or something else, but actually half of all men at my age have prostate cancer. And the more calcium you take and the more dairy food you eat, the more likely you'll get it. So you can definitely get too much of that. You can get too much selenium, as I mentioned before. And so that's why I like the hair analysis, is because when I talk to people in counseling, I'll say, what supplements do you take? Well, I've been taking zinc. Well, how long have you been taking zinc? Oh, about 3 years now, you know. They have no idea. Do you still need zinc? You know, maybe you've got too much zinc now, because zinc is the antagonist of copper, and copper also has important functions. So you should get a hair analysis, or, you know, some way. You can do a blood test if you like, but it has to be a special blood test, because a normal medical doctor serum blood test just doesn't tell you anything. I remember how many times I saw these tests in the clinic, just the normal blood tests with cancer patients. They've been told they have 3 months to live, and their blood tests were perfect. But when they did the spectrometric blood test, then there was none of them had a perfect blood test there. So when you do some kind of check, you can find out, what are you missing? And then you say, okay, now I'll take something for that. But the idea that more is better definitely can be dangerous to your health, because it's a very fine mechanism. You know, in the book, I pointed out that the word medicine actually comes from Latin, meaning medi, M-E-D-I, medi, which is the Latin word for middle. So medicine is the art of bringing someone back to the middle. And so you're out of balance, you get back to the middle. So that means your blood pressure is not too high, not too low. Your pH is not too high, not too low. You know, your body temperature is not too high, not too low. All these things, you know, all the body functions are not too high and too low. And that is also for your copper and all. And then when you're in the middle, you're healthy. And so medicine should be the art of bringing us back to the middle. And I think macrobiotics is that, because macrobiotics does what we find in something called functional medicine, and also in environmental medicine, which is you look at the person and ask yourself, what does this person need to come into balance? He's out of balance. So that's real medicine. Like normal doctors saying, okay, you have high blood pressure, take high blood pressure medication. That's no balance. You know, that's just taking a toxic substance that's going to poison a certain function in your body. I remember once when I was in Washington, D.C. doing a program, a woman came for counseling, and I said, she said she'd had a slight heart attack, wasn't too serious, but she was now interested in health. So I said, what medications do you take? She said, well, I'm taking high blood pressure medication. And I said, well, I'll tell you a way that's going to bring your blood pressure down without the medication. And she said, well, I don't have high blood pressure. So I said, well, why are you taking the medication? She said, well, my doctor said, this is the program you take when you've had a heart attack. You take statins, lower your cholesterol, blood pressure medication, we've got this whole thing, and that's what you do, whether you need it or not. And so, you know, doctors are supposed to be this, you know, intelligent elite of society, and basically, you know, they're just following the program, and it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to just give somebody their protocol to follow. You know, over the year, I've had some of my friends tell me I should actually write a book about some of these interesting encounters I've had over the years, because the medical profession is really crazy, and we see this especially now with this COVID crisis, because you know, if we had an enlightened society, we could get a handle on this very quickly. We would have, you know, checking people's vitamin D levels, say, don't eat sugar. You know, sugar is going to knock out your white blood cells. Your killer cells can't kill cancer cells. They can't kill viruses. Don't do all that. But of course, they're never going to do that, because of all the lobby money and all this power that is in Washington to be sure that we don't change anything. And so we're really paying the price for that, because people just, they're so blinded by the authority there. You know, the authority told me to do this, so I'm going to do that. Yeah. And you know, it requires that you think for yourself. And as we see, thinking is not popular these days.
It is not. It is not.
Yeah, I would like to come back to the States. I usually spend the summers in the States. I have family in Oregon. But this year there's no flights over, and so I've had to be without it. But I usually do lectures in Seattle and Portland, and they've got other things going on there this year. So you know, I do what I can, and I find that the people who follow what I recommend also do well. You know, this is a tried and true method with macrobiotics. When people ask me something, what's the most important thing about macrobiotics that other people don't know? I say, what would you say is something people should know that most people don't know? Like if I said, don't eat sugar, well, everybody knows that. There's nothing new with that. And even if I say, don't take dairy food, well, that's really got around too quite a bit. But I tell them, we need seaweed to be healthy. And that's something most people don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one reason a big reason why I'm doing so well after all these years. First of all, most people have an iodine deficiency, mm-hmm. and that's why they iodize salt. Right. But you can't eat enough salt to get that much iodine, and that's not even the right iodine anyway. It's potassium iodide, which is a synthetic form of iodine. So we eat seaweed, especially kombu, mm-hmm. and we get lots of it. Mm-hmm. The Japanese eat hundreds of times more iodine than we do. Or I shouldn't say we, I actually eat like the Japanese. But like most Westerners do, and thyroid problems are almost unheard of in Japan. Mm-hmm. Even Hashimoto, the autoimmune illness of the thyroid, it's named after a Japanese researcher, but he had to come to the West to research it because there weren't Hashimoto cases in Japan. That with seaweed, you have this special iodine source that almost everybody is lacking. And of course, your thyroid is the pacemaker for your whole health. And then you have these large amounts of magnesium. The seawater's got lots of magnesium. Mm. And what I wrote in the book also is that seaweed it's a reflection of human blood, exactly, except for the sodium. There's more sodium in seawater than in human blood. But otherwise, when we eat seaweed, we're really connecting with our very origin. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing I always tell people is especially unique to the macrobiotic program. And I find almost nobody else knows that, and all other kinds of food regimens that are promoted out there. Yeah, so it's just keep getting the word out there. And, my children are now about your age, and they recently I was going to visit my daughter who lives in Copenhagen, Denmark, and so I asked her, what can I bring for you? And she said, oh, bring some seaweed. Seaweed is so expensive here, little small bags, and we get it bigger amounts here. So it's great to have, your daughter saying, bring me some seaweed. That's what I'd really like to have.
Do you guys get really good quality seaweed from the ocean water near you?
Yeah, we do actually. It's a good point. There's a company called Algamar from northern Spain, and they harvest off of the northern coast of Spain, which is Atlantic Ocean and very clean water. And so they supply Europe with seaweed. It's very good quality. I mean, they do have limited amounts here, but the Norwegians have lots of seaweed, but they've never got into a commercial use of it. They use it mostly as fertilizer for their crops. And fortunately, because of the EU, we have all this quick trade. And I know some of the people from Algamar. In fact, when I was in Berlin, they asked me one evening to do a public lecture just on the subject of seaweed, which I'd never done before. I always mentioned them, but I'd never spoken exclusively about seaweed. And then they came along and brought a few dishes made with seaweed so that the people who came could taste that. And their business is really expanding. And especially because since Fukushima, people in Europe are very skeptical of eating Japanese seaweed. Mm-hmm. And I've seen the tests on it, and Japanese seaweed, with the exception of nori, has no heightened amounts of radioactivity. And the nori wasn't much, but you definitely could see that it had somewhat more.
Well, that's comforting to know, because I still have some Japanese seaweed.
That's great. Yeah. Well, you could certainly have it. I still eat Japanese seaweed too. But I've noticed that the Algamar has really increased their sales because people are afraid of it. And for me, as a counselor, it's really important because when I mention seaweed, automatically you get this objection to them. And then people just relax when they hear that you can get Spanish seaweed. Yeah, well, if I was going to think of something else, the other thing I would think, which is really a key thing, although some people do talk about this, it's not uniquely macrobiotic, really like the seaweed, but that is fermented vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
About 80% of our digestive system is focused in the digestive system, the immune system. 80% of the immune system is in the digestive system.
Mm-hmm.
And to be really strong in the immune system, we need to have a good gut bacteria. And, I eat pickled vegetables, which I make myself, or I do buy them, the kind that are non-vinegar, they're natural fermentation. You have to buy them out of the cooler section in the shop. They're not on the shelves. And I have at least 3-4 tablespoons of that at every meal, even with breakfast. With miso soup, it doesn't seem so strange to eat pickles for breakfast. But that constantly re-establishes a healthy gut flora. When you think we've got 1.5 to 2 kilos, that's like going up to close to 5 pounds of gut bacteria. And it's, the average person, that's a lot of weight, that's a lot of bacteria. And our health is really very much guided by that. Many people just don't have that. First of all, if they drink chlorinated water, that chlorination is going to kill bacteria. So everybody should have a water filter anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Get rid of the chlorine. But even if they have a water filter, we really need to have fermented food that really actively build up that gut bacteria. And that's another one of the big issues for me with the macrobiotic program.
I had homemade kimchi for breakfast, so I concur.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's really fun to make these things yourself.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like a hobby. More fun than collecting stamps or something. I get something for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and of course, with the energetics of macrobiotics, I found when I got out into real mainstream counseling, like in the clinic, I had to tone down the yin and yang energies in food a bit, because these people came, with, hemorrhoids or whatever, and they were just interested in what they could do about it. They didn't have that deeper interest in the energetics of food. So I quit talking about yin and yang. I spoke somewhat about the expansion and contractive forces, but I became much more biochemically oriented with them so that I could be sure they would understand me and they would not think I was crazy. I mean, the doctors were already, they called me the grain guru. That was my nickname in the clinic, but among the doctors, the grain guru. So I tried as much as possible to present a very, natural science approach and not get too much. That reminds me of another interesting story. Once I was invited to the Austrian Health Fair in Vienna, Austria, and I was in a panel discussion with must have been 6 or 7 of us there. And I was the only one in the panel who was not a doctor or a professor, medical doctor or professor. I was there as the alternative guy. And so we were supposed to present ourselves, and I was at the end. So I started first, and I said, well, I've been eating macrobiotic kind of food, which is focused on energy and like the energetics of food. Does it warm the body? Does it cool the body? Does it relax the body, etc.? And so the energetics of food are very interesting. And then the man next to me was a professor of medicine at the University of Vienna. And he said, well, I'm a scientist. I deal with facts, not energies, he said, in a very condescending way. And somebody in the audience raised his hand. He said, Professor, he said, I'm a scientist. He said, isn't it true that those things we accept now as scientific fact, we throw out next year as nonsense? and the professor said, yes, that's true. Then the next professor there, he said, well, I'm sure this man is right, pointing to me. I'm sure this man is right that food is important for health and that we should think about it. But food is also an experience, a social experience, a sensorial experience. And so let's enjoy ourselves. But if we do get ill, then let's certainly listen to this man and eat well. And then somebody else in the audience said, Professor, I'm shocked at what you just said. He said, this makes about as much sense as telling people to speed down the freeway, but then start driving carefully if you have an accident. And the professor said, well, I obviously have to think about this a bit more. He did have that much humility to pull back there.
Nice.
Yeah. And thinking of another little incident I had in 1986, we had Chernobyl in Europe, which, you know, was the horrible nuclear disaster. And there was a lot of fear going around because of the fallout in Europe with all this radioactivity. And in Berlin, I worked a lot in Berlin at the time. In Berlin, they had a big store of food, which was there in case the Russians ever blocked the access roads to Berlin again, like Stalin did in 1948. He tried to starve the Berliners out. So then they had the airlift, you know, the U.S. planes flying in there every minute a plane was landing. So they had this huge store of food in Berlin in case there would be another blockade. So they came up with the idea that when it turned out that milk is most quickly and easily contaminated by radioactivity. So no one was drinking any milk in Germany. So they decided they're going to get this milk powder out of their food storage and offer it to people. So one of my friends was actually involved in passing this out. And so the rule was that if a child up to 1 year could get this, but there was limited supply because they were only going to let 10% of the milk powder out. So if you had a child up to 1 year, you could get the milk, but if over 1 year, no. So he told me there were hysterical scenes of women there with children who were over one, and, you know, and if I don't get this milk, my child will die. And so now I'm at the Austrian fair, sitting there next to, at one of these panel discussions, sitting next to Austria's best known pediatrician, you know, dealing with childhood diseases. And so we got into this discussion about milk, if it's really something for children. And then he said, well, we know from our scientific evidence that giving a child cow milk before the age of 1 damages the kidneys. It's just, it's foreign protein. Mm-hmm. And I said, isn't this interesting that just a few years ago with Chernobyl, that they're in Berlin, that they were passing out milk powder only to children up to 1 year when it will damage their kidneys. And then after 1 year, when it's supposedly not a problem anymore, then you couldn't get it. Whereas he's now saying the evidence is very clear. Children under 1 year should not have milk. And then I said, do you really think that it is totally okay to have milk at 1 year? You know, it's just a rounded off calendar event. It's, you know, and how can it be okay after 1 year? And he immediately backed off. And he tried, basically what he told me indirectly was that he did not want to get trouble with the Austrian dairy industry, is what came out of that. Yeah.
Powerful industries control so much of what what's commonly accepted as, you know, food facts. You know, the real medicine is just, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, so that's right.
Steven, I have another question for you.
Sure.
What is your view about the situation of the world right now with COVID and everything that's going on? Like, give us some big picture stuff about all that.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I think this is a very important question that you just asked, and it's something that kind of lies in the background the whole time we're talking about health, et cetera. Like, what is our future? And I think what we're seeing is basically a breakdown of our society at all levels. When we see this craziness going on in the streets of, you know, setting fire to police cars and everything as if that's going to accomplish something. One of the really interesting books that I read about 20 years ago was by Carol Simontaki. She's a clinical psychologist, and the book is called The Crazy Makers. Now, she wrote this book about 25 years ago. And at that time, she wrote that in the baby food that these young babies are getting, these are now the people out in the streets, in their baby food, there are 13 neurotoxins, organophosphate toxins from their the baby food they're getting. He said, this is affecting their nervous system. And in my clinical psychological practice, I am seeing much more craziness among children. And she wrote, I think, unfortunately, that it's too late to turn this around. This is a very serious issue. And when I've been watching this stuff going on in the streets, what's going on, and you know, the whole chaotic mental scene going on, I think about what she was saying. That comes down to some very basic biochemical facts, that the body is being overloaded by these things, and the nervous system is now being affected so that we can no longer think clearly. Now we take that on top of what's happening with COVID. Like I read the statistics that the U.S. government spent $8 billion more in June, just the month of June last year. June of 2019, they spent $8 billion more than they took in. And in June of 2020, because of the COVID thing and the payouts to everyone, they spent $865 billion more than they took in. And so what we see is this incredible mushroom effect of debt. And at some point, the dollar will start losing value. Now, because I've lived in Europe a long time and I'm familiar with European history, the Weimar Republic of Germany is a good example, that they went into this huge debt thing and their money lost value. It created chaos. And we ended up with this crazy Nazi running the place, where in the first election where Hitler, in Germany, Hitler got 2% of the vote. That's how many people thought he was okay. But then the crisis came and people were out of work, they were hungry, and he never did get a majority vote. He actually just sneaked his way into the office. But the point is that what I see happening now is this general, at all levels. It's the psychological level, it's the health level, but also the government level with debt, that we're looking at a big event that could become like the Great Depression. In fact, it might even be worse, because in the Great Depression, most people still grew a lot of their own vegetables. So my vision of what's going on now is that we need to develop our ability to get more local, organic, try to get free of this this whole globalist international kind of thing, and discover things like how to grow our own food, to interact with people who do have some kind of skill that people need. Like, I think the medical system is going to collapse at some point, and those of us who deal with alternative healing will have plenty to do just helping them out. But I think what we're going to see is like a whole shift in our culture, and hopefully that we'll be able to push this to a positive change that we can get through without too much calamity and chaos. Because the way things are going now, we have just there's too many things are falling apart at the same time, and we lack this ability to have clear mental function, which is the very basis of of what we can do. We teach this in macrobiotics, that if you have a physical problem, even something as bad as cancer, you can at least do something about it if you have a clarity in your mental state. Look, I've got to do this, I can't do that. And when the nervous system is affected, which macrobiotically speaking is a much deeper kind of illness, that then you lose the ability to judge properly, and then you're really in trouble, because you can no longer have a vision of where you're going. And this is what I'm afraid might happen if we don't turn it the right way. So I find it a bit depressing almost, although I never really get depressed, but I could, using the expression, it's a bit depressing to see who the two candidates for president are in the US. Out of 330 million people, we have a narcissist on the one hand, and we have a demented person on the other hand, who should not even be standing there, as being in office. He's obviously not capable of doing the job. And so we're all waiting to see who's going to be the vice president then, because the vice president's actually going to run the show. And right now we need people who are really sharp, can handle crises, and we really don't have them, on either side of the political scale there. So I see some real challenges coming, and I think this is where macrobiotic health really comes in, because those of us who are strong will get through it better. Even just people getting depressed. If you fall for depression, then you no longer have that drive to really, get yourself going and find a solution. And depression is, within the next 5 to 10 years, is supposed to become the second most widespread public health problem. So you can imagine what will happen with people who lost their jobs, losing their house. If they have any kind of depressive tendencies at all, they'll get compounded.
Yeah, especially if their supply to their drugs gets, cut off, which they're dependent on. Everyone thinks that all they need is pop pills and they're good to go. It's ridiculous.
That's right. That's a very good point, is exactly that. As people get poorer, they don't have the money, and the medical system is, all these people on insulin now, I have seen people who have got off insulin, got their blood sugar in order within 2 weeks, just with the food. And just because obviously insulin is going to be a reaction to the food you eat. And we have all these possibilities, but because people are so dependent on their drugs, a lot of them are going to go under that way. And we always know the opioid crisis is already making headlines.
Yeah. So we have tons of issues and fun stuff to look forward to, and we'll see how it goes. But we're getting on the hour mark, and I don't want to go too long. So, Steven, this has been fascinating. Tons of great information. It's great to hear your story and to hear all your knowledge and wisdom. As always, I have my website, themacrobioticdiet.com, where you can check out, read my blogs, book an appointment with me. My mom's doing a class this is coming Saturday, August 15th at 10 a.m. And that's it for me, guys. Steven, any final words? Anything you want to share?
I just want to thank you for the effort you're making to spread the word, because this is a great venue for doing that, a great possibility with the technical things, and I think that's just a great thing that you are jumping into this thing, because that's your contribution to trying to spread some sanity around.
Exactly. Now's the time. I mean, we're in it. We're in the muck, so we all got to do our part to get through this.
Okay. Well, thanks again. And maybe I'll check out your website, and maybe we'll see each other online sometime.
Thank you, Steven. It was really great having you here and talking to you. So thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.